Hey guys, welcome back to a deck profile with yours truly, Paul Reisman. Today we're going to be talking about the Athenia Death Loop list that I played in our recent featured match last week. Let's dig in.
This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, CCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for product, and FoulLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists. It's also brought to you by our guest lecturer patrons, Vite Ramen. Class is in session.
So guys, this is a deck I have been trying to get on the channel for a long time. We actually have been trying to get it on so long we forgot whether or not we posted it or not. But this is something that as soon as Charlie DeMeulle, and this is kind of where the brainchild of this deck was Charlie DeMeulle, he recognized that there is an infinite loop with Athenia, the order ruler that we have here, that is death on the first side, and then when you flip it, it's on rebirth. Athenia is such an interesting ruler in that, you know, she has two different force commands on either side, and then she has some really powerful cards in general. This version of the list is not so much a control list, but it can kind of shift gears a little bit. At least in my experience of running the deck, you can kind of go into a more you don't have to rely on the death loop quite so much, but if you're confused on how to do the death loop, we'll kind of explain it here. It was shown in the video, of course, but we're going to have over on our Facebook page, Ruler School TCG on Facebook, there's going to be a graphic that kind of explains how this combo works. So if you're listening to me and you're like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know why this is happening, I can kind of explain it over there. So let's just get right into the deck list. You're playing Athenia. She flips over into the order of death and rebirth. Her force command changes, and of course she has the text where if you call a stone, the ordered card does not have to rest. So that's really helpful in general to just have that available. Order is going to be an interesting deck archetype going forward, because it's still going to be around. It's going to be a little bit of a niche thing, but I think Athenia has a lot of potential as one of the primary order decks going forward into the meta. So I'm interested in experimenting with her more. What this deck is trying to do is it's trying to establish 3 cards. It's trying to put Death Scythe in the graveyard alongside an Elixir's Love, and either in the graveyard or in your hand, Athenia enters the Game of Gods. These cards are pivotal for the Death Loop. So if you don't know what Athenia enters the Game of Gods does, your opponent banishes a Resonator. If they don't, they discard a card. On either side of your Athenia, this is what this card does. If you need additional cards, you can do that by using the Death side, remove some cards from the graveyard, draw 3 additional cards. That's a lot of value for a 1-drop. That is not going to be easily canceled outside of something like Girion. So just keep that in mind too. This card is not having quick cast isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you flip your Athenia, and this is how you start the Death Loop, you may put up to 3 cards from your removed area and recover Y entities. That includes Magic Stones, Additions, Regalia, and Resonators on the field, and J Rulers too, by the way. So this is where the Death Loop kind of gets ridiculous. You're able to generate additional mana, you're able to attack and attack again. This card has a lot of utility in that it recovers things, it gets you additional resources, but it also makes your opponent feel bad because they lose a resource every single time you play it. The goal at the end of the day, at least plan A in this version of the list, is to play this card enough times that your opponent has no field, so no Resonators outside of their J-Ruler, and no hand as well. If you happen to have something like a Borozuki on the field, you get a ton of instances of her getting more counters as a result of her continuous effect. Her automatic ability effect, where things are triggered when things go to the graveyard from the RFG. So she's going to get really, really, really big. She's going to be able to remove counters to just establish a neg on your opponent's board, which is really strong. A Borozuki is definitely one of the best Darkness Resonators that we've seen in a very long time. I would say probably since... I might get in trouble for this, but probably since Mikage Rhea came out. So this card is super, super good for that. She got a couple of new tools as well, but we'll get into those a little bit later in the list. So what I try and do on turn 1 is to play Origin of the Seven Lands. Origin of the Seven Lands reveals a Drywing in the sideboard, recovering my stone and producing a green off of the Origin effect. So now I have 2 mana. All of my stones produce black and green, which means I get to play Harvesting Season for effectively 1, right? So typically you would not be playing this in the main board, but Athenia, this particular instance, really benefits from just dumping 10 cards to the graveyard. She's really going to benefit from this. Hopefully, and I'm putting the emphasis on hopefully, you are milling either a Death Scythe or an Elixir's Love or an Athenia Enters the Game of Gods to just dump those things into the graveyard. But at the end of the day, you're milling 10 cards, so that turns on your Spirits of Decay, right? Draining a fourth of your opponent's life is pretty substantial. This card is probably one of the best cards in the deck outside of a Borozuki herself, so this card is super, super good. Just drain 10, get some counters, and then I can just control your board with the 1-drop that I have, right? Super, super good. So I'm playing 4 Harvesting Season, 3 Origin. The reason is because I have 3 Origin, I do not have a 4th. And I'm still looking for that. So, you know, like, hit me up if you have one out there. Harvesting Season at 4, I just want to see this in my opening hand with Origin. If not, turn 2, this is a really good play to make. Of course, it is a little bit vulnerable because it is a prime target for any cancel spell. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you want a Harvesting Season if your opponent is not playing something like any sort of green list. This card is almost always going to work off whatever you do. If you play it off of just your stones or your Origin, this card will just always get off. A Borozuki, Vampire Astrologer. Again, we talked about this already. She can get huge. She has an additional win con for the deck. I play 2 Guild Lapis. This is another way for me to drain my opponent's life outside of Spirit of Decay, but it's also a mill outlet. So even if I'm playing this on my opponent's turn because, you know, my Harvesting Season didn't get to hand or didn't have Origin or doesn't feel safe, playing Guild Lapis is another good way of dumping cards into the graveyard, but also getting cards back. So things like my Ona Borozukis or my Spirits of Decay or the next card on here, right? Death Speaker Monk. Death Speaker Monk is good. It's essentially a replacement for Shinjiro, in my opinion. So you discard this card by paying black, and then you mill 3 to the graveyard. You're essentially putting 4 cards into the graveyard with this 1 card. So again, you can get to that win condition of draining your opponent by just playing Death Speaker Monk instead of Harvesting Season. You're able to sort of slow down and get that effect off. I'm playing 3 Mikage Rhea. And the reason I'm playing Rhea over the zombie is because the zombie was a little bit too imperfect. I tried testing with the zombie, but the fact that it's a 2-drop, the fact that sometimes you don't mill it, just feels really bad. Mikage Rhea is here, though, to essentially dump any card that you need into the graveyard outside of Elixir's Love. So you can discard the Death Scythe, you can discard the Athenia Enters the Game of Gods, and bring it back with your Elixir's Love. That's always really helpful. That can help you start the combo. But it's really there so that you have a way of dumping your Death Scythe, and it's really good turn 1. So more than 3 felt really clunky. Felt like I had more in my hand than I actually needed, and they kind of weren't useful anymore. So I went down to 3, and I've never wanted to go back. So there's that. Talked about Death Speaker Monk a little bit. Lorites are important in this list. They stop your opponent and you give you a little bit of interaction. The reason I'm playing Lorite over Heatsing is because I don't have any additions. So I still think Lorite is still one of the staple cards in green right now. And if you happen to get it back with something like your Guild Lapis, he's there to just interact with your opponent's board. I found that I need like 1 or 2 really well-timed Lorites to really mess with my opponent's plays. And by then, I have the Death Loop online. So this is actually an okay number for me. 4, I wouldn't blame you though. So feel free to put in an additional Laureate if you wish, but 3 has been working for me just fine. I play 3 of Soul Hunt. So in the first versions of this deck, I would often get Death Scythe in hand, or I'd get like Elixir's Love in hand, or I'd get stuff in hand that I didn't want anymore. And so I said, you know, Athenia Enters the Game of Gods is just basically Soul Hunt, but Soul Hunt allows me to get rid of those cards from my hand. So this card is super good for that. It gets around Eternal, it gets around Barrier. This card I think is always just going to be flavorful, especially for those old school players who remember this card. And then I play 2 Essences of Athenia's Power. This is just a way, because I'm not playing any trees, this is just a way for me to like put RFG into my grave, trigger a Borazuki's effects. It's really helpful in that way. If they try and horn me, I can just remove my entire graveyard instead, and then I still have things online, which is really helpful. So this card was just an interaction for any horns that were, you know, gonna attack me and do some stuff. So this is here for that, but it's also part of the win condition with a Borazuki. In my sideboard, I'm playing 4 Drywing. I just play 4 Drywing. You don't have to play 4 if you feel like 3 is enough or 2 is enough. I see myself, you know, playing Drywing literally every turn when I have an Origin, because it's just additional free mana. Unless my opponent has another Drywing that's shutting down that effect, I just think this card is just too good. Plus he's the Dragon Zord with wings, so that's pretty dope. I play 1 Mechanized Fenrir in the sideboard in case my opponent's playing anything that is not machine. This is just a really good way for me to make it so my opponent doesn't get to do anything. It's also really good against Zeus, so this is a good card for that. My stone base is pretty standard. You're playing 2 Killing Stones because I don't want to lose a lot of life. You're playing 4 of the Black Silence and 4 of the Moon Fragment so that you always have black and green. You can... I guess you can play Interactive Morias if you want to, but I just wanted to make sure I always had the color that I needed on turn 1, so that Harvesting Season always popped. That was the goal. So guys, let me know what you think of the Death Loop down below in the comment section down below. This deck was super fun. Is it mega competitive? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. If your opponent sees it coming and they're able to dismantle it, it's not really that amazing, but it's certainly one of the funner lists I've played in the recent months. So let us know what you think down below in the comment section down below. Give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell for more content like this. And until next time, this has been Paul, signing off.